Thank you. Welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for coming tonight. I'm Hannah Reynolds, and I'm the chair of the trust which owns this building. We own it in trust for the community of St David's, in order that it can be for community activities in perpetuity, rather than being turned into a private development. So this is our big project, and actually it's been a very, very big project since about 2009 when we set up the trust, and through the first phase of the redevelopment of the building as a centre. This second phase, which is the launch of our big project tonight, has two particular aims. The first of them is to bring back the top floor of this building into community use. And those of you who have been on the tour will know that we're very near completion of that, and that will add about a third of the space again to the space that we can offer to communities, which is just brilliant because we were becoming very, very tight for space before the lockdown. The second of our aims is to help people and encourage people to know more about the centre and its heritage and the heritage and history of St David's. So what we're wanting to do particularly is recruit find-outers. We want to recruit community researchers who have some time as volunteers between now and March next year to do some research on the 4 themes of our big project. And the first of those is the centre, to find out more about the centre as first a merchant's house, and then a West of England school for the blind, and then through to becoming a community centre run by local authority, and then a community trust. The second of those, and also to look at how it fits into the surroundings of St David's. The second of those themes that we're having is unfortunately about death, disease, epidemics. In St David's, the plague in the medieval times, the cholera epidemic, and taking us right up to modern times as well. Then the third theme is plants, plant hunters, and pleasure grounds. And that will take in the famous Veitch family of plant hunters, and also some of the grounds and the parks that we have around in St David's. And then the fourth theme is charity. Charity then, so the cathedral, the religious orders, coming up through the kind of Victorian benefactor who donated and made happen these kinds of community centres, schools and churches, and then up to modern day. So why is it that people do want to give their time, their money, their energy to make society a better place? And is it any different now than it was a long time ago? So those are the themes that we're going to be concentrating on, and there's kind of sub-themes under them on that plan over there that you'll be able to see. What we're wanting to do with that information is to create an archive which will be there forever, so that people will be able to see it on our website, and also they'll be able to see it on other websites. So the material that's gathered by the find-outers, the community researchers, will then be pulled together into an archive. And what we aim to do, if I turn your faces to the back wall there, is to also have that information on touch screen, so that people coming into the centre will be able to find out by touching the screen and various different aspects of the display. They'll be able to see the information that we've gathered. And we're also hoping that that information will be connected with other community heritage projects around in the city, so that we're all able to enjoy what really is the great richness of culture that's in Exeter. I just have to check my notes to see what else I have to say. I want to thank the staff and the volunteers for bringing us this far. I'd like to thank our funders, and you know who you are, but particularly I would like to thank Exeter City Council, partly because you're sitting here, but partly because without you we wouldn't have been able to take on this next Our Big project. So before I introduce the main event, Dr Todd Gray, I'd like to call upon Councillor Amal Ghusain to come up and propose a toast to the success of Our Big project.
Well, good evening, everyone, and what a lovely occasion to celebrate. So I would like to propose a toast. Please hold up your glasses to the success of our great big project.
Thank you. Our Big project.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr Todd Gray, who will be very famous amongst some of you who've heard him speak already. He's a very popular act, I understand. Dr Todd Gray is a historian who's based at Exeter University, and he has written about 50 books about Devon, because his research is mainly, although not exclusively, about Devon, and 12 of those books are about Exeter. We wanted Todd to come and talk to us because it's going to be a wonderful event, I know, but we also wanted Todd to talk to us because he is heading up the advisory group of specialists who are going to help the community researchers through the process of research. So that will be a real treat that we've got expert information and support and guidance in order to get our archive together. So, Dr Todd Gray was appointed as he was given the freedom of Exeter in 2018, and to 2014 he was also awarded an MBE by the Queen. So I'd like to welcome Dr Todd Gray.
Right, well, thank you very much for turning out. This is the first time I've worn proper long trousers in 6 months, and then I've given a lecture, and it just feels a bit odd after all these, well, after 6 months. Now, what we're aiming to do, and the person in the corner is Russ, who you can direct any particular questions about subject matter if you have any at the end. What we're trying to do is bring up together aspects of St. David's, which will, I'm hoping, start a process of doing a more thorough history of St. David's, because once people get trained up and they get interested in St. David's, you start thinking, oh, I haven't done that building, or I should have done this, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it'll just get added to what's here. And I'm hoping we'll have a handful of resident historians who become more and more knowledgeable about what we're looking at every day. So if we think of, actually Keith, could you pull that? Does that go down a little bit?
Pull it, yeah, just pull it.
That might cut the glare out a little bit. Yeah, there we go. That's better. Looking at the parish, and it's a very big parish, which we're not doing. It's one of the, I think it may be the biggest in Exeter. Looking from Exwick across, this is mid-1800s, and it's a beautiful place to live, you can see. And what I think it's very easy to do is to forget about the type of place that St. David's is. And what I want to do is to look at some of the things we're going to be thinking about in the project, radiating out from, of course, this building and the various themes. We have an area which we've decided upon is the area we're going to study for the physical side of the study. And if you look, it goes down to the river, runs along to St. David's Station, up to the side of Bury Meadow, along the prison, and then down to Central Station, and then down again the Longbrook Valley. And it's a very odd area. when you walk around it. And it's a little bit more aspirational, I think, in the 19th century than many other parts of Exeter. And it's easy to forget that. And there are topics we're going to be looking at, like the river, mill on the Exe. Of course, this is where Exeter got its water from. The water company was at the bottom of Mount Dinham in that 17th century. So there's a different history there of providing water for the city. This is a watercolor that used to be part of the Exeter City collection. It's now part of Devon County collection by Mr. Gendel, probably early 1800s. This is the following century. And I'm hoping, and I'm going to show some of the others, what I would like us to do is some of the researchers just to do 300 words on the picture and what it represents at the time by the artist, and do things which we can get away with the screens. When you're doing research and you're trying to publish, you're often saying, I can't afford to publish that picture because it's going to add another 50 quid to the cost of the book, to the run. With touchscreens, we can have as many pictures and as much color as we possibly want, and we can do this on the internet as well. And a nice little description of this in the mid-19th century, mid-20th century, and what it shows and why that was there and what's different, be very nice with another 20 different art pictures we have. Now, this is an interesting picture. One of the allied topics for the mid-1900s, for the 1940 to 45, is that Exeter was a reception area for the blind. So we had 200 blind people coming to Exeter because it was a safe city. And then the bombing happened, and then it was very difficult for people to get around Exeter when for 6 months or so there was still rubble in the streets, which people had to step over. But you can imagine being blind and not being able to do this. We have the most wonderful series of examinations of some of these people in the record office. I think I'm the only one who's used them. And they detail what it's like in Exeter to be blind during the war. And there's a tremendous story of a boy of 6 years old who was being thrown out. I think his father had no sight. And the lady of the house, who the council had insisted that they go in as evacuees, threw them out because the father had left the toilet in a state which she didn't agree with. So the little boy at 6 was being prosecuted by this owner for cleaning the mahogany toilet seat too hard to clean it to suit her standards. Now, the lack of humanity of this woman runs through the whole examination. And there's case after case after case. There's one very salacious one of a blind man with a number of women. He seems to have been very charming and got himself into one bad situation after another. But there are loads of these little stories which should be brought out and bring alive a part of the history of Exeter in the Second World War, which has been completely overlooked. And it's those little things, and you can sit in the record office, photograph, or just go through the documents. One afternoon you could get it done. So it's not an enormous job, but it's fun. The obvious structures we're looking at, of course, the Iron Bridge, 1830, so we're coming up to 200 years. There's a whole other history of how North Street and the run down in front of the Crown and Scepter, how that was reformatted in order to make the access a bit easier, and then the Iron Bridge itself. That is a little topic. The North Gate itself is interesting because there were half a dozen or so very questionable pubs outside where things happened which couldn't happen under the eye of the police inside the city. And so St. David's was a refuge for the type of program you might have seen last night on ITV, or was it BBC? I can't remember what Harlots was on, but it's that
BBC
kind
Two.
of BBC Two. Well, it's a respectable thing if it's BBC Two.
Very cultural.
And and then, you know, the big set pieces with Northgate, when it was attacked and nearly destroyed by an army, Perkin Warbeck. St. David's Station, I'm hoping we can attract at least one railway enthusiast. It's something we need, somebody who already has that knowledge, because that is such a dangerous thing for a novice to get involved with, because there are people who spend their entire lives interested in one track and nothing else. So we're hoping we're going to get somebody who can write up that and not get into any of the pitfalls that other people get into. Now, this is what I think the great strength is of St. David's, is the funny buildings that we have. We pass them by all the time and we don't notice. This one isn't actually on our map, but I went around and I was photographing them. This is the other side of Bury Meadow. And I'm sure most people will know nearly every of them, but some of them you sit and think, now I know that one, but I can't place exactly where it is. Well, Linden Vale is a series of 7 very substantial buildings. And what will be nice would be for somebody to come in and do some of these terraces. We can find out very easily the date of them, the builder, and what's really fascinating is the first occupants, the type of people they are. Are they Exeter people? Are they coming in from outside? Do they have servants? What do they do for jobs, if they have jobs? Very easy to find out. While I was photographing that, 2 of the owners came out and had a chat with me. There's a man in the 90s who supposedly knows everything about the buildings. And the story which is told there is a builder built the 7 buildings for his 7 sons. Now, it's a great story, and it may even be true, but it's a fun thing to go and see if that's true. Were those occupants the 7 brothers? Or did they rent them out? Is it just something people say? It's one of those things which I'm hoping we're going to be able to do, is have a number of people who actually will go through a street and find out if there's somebody who's been there a long time, who knows a lot about the buildings. Do they have photographs? Are there any plans? And can we take photographs of internal features? And I think this is one of the things which would be really nice to for residents to be able to come in and then see a history of what they pass by all the time and say, oh, I know that. I didn't know that was 1862. That's earlier than that one there, but later than this one over here. And we can do that now. Now, I didn't know Woodbine Terrace. I've overlooked it. But there it is, I think. And this is just behind, is it the Gandhi? Where the clock tower is. And it's a nice little row. Again, a short little topic for somebody to look at. And these are so easy to do. And what we can do is look in Exeter City Council Street Minute books, which have all the discussions on how these buildings are being named, who's responsible for them, and you get all the little stories involved around them. And, you know, I'm sure council meetings now for committees are as interesting as now as they were then. But if you give it 150 years, they're fascinating. You may not want to sit through 4 hours today, but looking at something from 1820, somehow they're magical. And once we start looking at the parish and we start looking at the streets and the buildings in them, we start to see how different they are. Pines Terrace. It's just around the corner. And they are impressive buildings. Why was this the place that had such enormous buildings going up? And when you think how different it is from Newtown or just the other side on Victoria Street, completely different types of people living here, but they're fascinating. And so what I'm hoping we're going to be able to do is almost put a face to some of these people, to these buildings, do little biographies of the people, and in effect what we're doing is biographies of the buildings themselves. And I don't think anybody's tried this in Exeter before, so if it works, it can be rolled out to other parts of the city. But we started off here and just see how it goes. But there's no reason why other parts of the city can't do it. But the very different construction of the buildings with yellow brick, very much a part of some parts of Devon and not others. You go into Cornwall, you don't see brick at all. But yellow brick you see in Bideford, Torrington, around Newton Abbot. And then other parts you just don't see it. You have to be near a railway line. But these are fascinating. And you actually start to pull them apart. And what we do need is somebody to take proper photographs, not my, little point and press. How often have we passed these and not really looked at them? But a nice little row, and we can date it to a year, to the exact year that it goes up. Same thing with this. And we have Richard Parker, who's one of our best buildings people for Devon, who's going to advise us on this. So we'll have expert help. But one after another, when you start to look at how varied the buildings are, it's extraordinary. And then one of the great features, how many of us have gone by and said, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Well, why don't we try to date it? Why is it there and nowhere else? There's a story to be told. So we've got this area. What Russ does very well, we'll have a proper OS map, and then for each of these little terraces, we can color them in for 1850, 1851, 1854. As each one is added on, we can put in a different color and show how St. David's is built. And I think if you live here, that's fascinating to look at and say, oh, look, all that's 1870s over there. That's all 1880s, but that over there is 1830s and 1840s. And we can do this now because we've got the technology and it doesn't cost anything, whereas just a few years ago, this was the sort of stuff you just wouldn't have thought about. So we can take advantage of what we have. And then, of course, including some of the older buildings. Professor Hoskins wrote about this in the 1930s or 1940s, as the oldest farmhouse next to the city that's still in existence. So we've got his work we can draw on. Come on in, you haven't missed a thing. Last people in always do the washing up, but that's okay, there isn't much. So we're going to look at some of the older ones as well, because on its own, that is a great building to have a look at. Now, we're going to be looking at some businesses, and one of the things which has happened, and I don't know how far back this goes, but it must be early 1900s, are the number of bed and breakfasts, hotels, and guest houses. This one is the Ue's Court Hotel, which used to be known by a different name, but I saw some Chinese visitors coming out of there, and I thought, I wonder what they think of the name. Have they been told what it's really called? Because that must have really stumped them. The Ue's Court. And then my favorite, the Telstar. I love that name. Was it Jan Bry was that one of the ones that was there as well? I think that's gone now.
Jan Bry was there, yeah, you're
And
right.
it's not
Yeah.
there anymore.
Yeah.
And there's a period when that happened, and it's gone now. You know, I'm assuming it's Janet and Brian, you know, but it's gone. It's not there. It's something else. But I thought we'll do those, which are good, and then as part of looking at, you know, the medical side, of looking at charity and how this building fits into the wider picture, we'll be looking at all those structures which are part of that in the parish itself, which are an awful lot of. So somebody's going to have to go along and plot out some of these buildings and have a good look, ransack around and see what old features there might still be in them. It's easier with some buildings than others. The almshouses have been written out to a good degree, and there's an awful lot in the newspapers for the 19th century, so it's a relatively easier one to do than some of the buildings we know nothing about. But those almshouses, together with Mount Dinham's, are really exceptional. They're exceptional for Exeter, let alone beyond. So that's going to be part of our remit. And then looking at the construction of St. David's, I don't think there's anything earlier than the Pepper Pot Church, which is just early 1800s. But, you know, it was a cracking building. It's a, you know, the current one is wonderful too. It's a shame we don't have both of them. But this is, you know, one of the great achievements for church building in the early 19th century. And, you know, it is a shame it's not there anymore. We do have this wonderful photograph of it.
St. David's Church.
That was St. David's
Oh,
until,
right, okay.
yeah. We had the medieval one, Pepper Pot, and then the 1905, 1906 one. So we've had 3 different buildings. But we do have enough of that. And what's good with that is we can talk about, it sounds morbid, but all the dead people in the graveyard. We can look at who's there and pull out some of their stories as well. And the church does have a list of all the graves. And we can pull out some of the ones, and there are 2 instances of people that were buried there, but didn't last too long in the ground. One of them was Elizabeth Taylor, no joke, who, now what date was she? 1826. The poor old girl, age of 67, she died, she was buried, and then they came back the next day and she was gone. And as it turned out, it was the sexton who had dug her up. They found him. They were a bit suspicious that it might have been him because he was hanging around the churchyard when she was being buried that afternoon, and they compared the footprint in the mud with his boot, and the nail mark underneath on his boot marked that print in the mud. I thought this was a brilliant way, because it's something, you know, Agatha Christie or Poirot would have done, but I've actually found it for the late 1500s as well, that they did the mud print and caught somebody in Devon doing the same thing. So it was an established practice. But they found the man who had done it. Unfortunately for his friend, it was Mr. Cook, the sexton. He had dug up the woman, poor Elizabeth Taylor, and he had carried her to Sidwell Street. And it was a frosty morning. So in the morning, his prints could be followed from St. David's Church to Sidwell Street. And it went to a door of a surgeon. And the police knocked on the door, went upstairs, and there was Elizabeth Taylor spread out on the table, about to be brought to a surgical examination lesson. He was being paid by medical doctors in Exeter to provide a cadaver in order for the surgeon's students to practice on. It was typical, it happened everywhere. But in St. David's it happened twice. So the sexton got 8 months in prison. The surgeon got 2 months. The Lancet, the prestigious medical journal, had a national campaign to pay his costs and to get him released early. Because they said it's appalling that these men are being prosecuted for practicing their surgery. They will thank us when they're on the operating table, when our doctors know how to cut into people by practicing on the dead. It's a very gruesome topic, but it's also great for the project as well. Now, this is an examination from the early 1700s. Anyone who was executed at Exeter Prison was brought to the RD&E at the bottom of Southernhay, and there they were used to be cut up by doctors. And this is part of the story of St. David's because the prison is there. So we have a handful, it's something like 30 different people are executed and their bodies are brought over. I'm not sure exactly the number, but I think it's about 30. And one of them, and these are the men going up the what's going to be the railway line. They're going from Rougemont Castle, going down to where Central Station is and going to the prison. And you can see them all being, they got chains on their feet and they're chained together. Well, one of the executed prisoners, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to go back. One of the executed prisoners was George Cudmore. And in 1830, his wife, Grace, died of arsenic poisoning, which was suspected to have been in her tea. She had a cup of elderflower and a griminy tea, died. Her husband, George, was arrested for poisoning her. The servant, who was his lover, was also arrested, brought to the castle. She was let off, but George Cudmore, who was 5'3" thick set with a hump on his left shoulder, was found guilty and was executed. It was thought by the people of Exeter that his lover, Sarah Dunn, was also guilty, but she had got off by the jury. George Cudmore asked if Sarah Dunn could be forced to watch him die. So on the gate of the prison, they set up the scaffold. 400 Exeter people came out to have a good watch. And when he died and he was hanging there, her head was forced to see her lover die. George Cudmore goes to the RD&E, and then George Cudmore's skin is used to create the binding for that volume, which is currently still in use at the Devon Heritage Centre. So if you've ever asked for Milton's Book of Poetry from 1853, you've been handling George Cudmore. It's an extraordinary story. Contempt for a human being to turn them into a book binding. It's not the only one. They showed it it was in the Ram for a long time. And in about 1900, I think it might have been Queen Mary was shown it. And she said, "Whatever did the man do?" And they said he murdered. And she said, well, fair enough. Or something like that. But it was brought out by the Ram to show the visiting dignitaries the skin of a dead man. So Milton is what you want. There are, I think, 3 blue plaques in the parish. There's Veitch, there's a Widgery, and then there's Hoskins, just across the street from us. And that, again, would make a nice little topic of little biographies. And it would be even nice if somebody was to talk to Susie Hewitt, who, of course, is his daughter, who's still in Exeter, to get a personal story of what it was like to grow up right across the street from us here. Bystock Terrace is interesting as a building, but it's also, I think, the only residence in St. David's to have a slave owner. And it'd be nice to do a little biography of her. There's not an awful lot to say about her. Mrs. Martha Moody, she's born in Barbados. She has a plantation in British Guiana, which was then called Demerara. I think her husband is from Hampshire. She comes here as a widow. For some reason, she comes to Exeter, and I don't know why. But we know which building in the terrace she's in, because she's in the census in 1851 to 53, and then she moves back up to Hampshire. Why come to Exeter? She's not a very wealthy woman as far as her plantation goes. She is given £35, 9 shillings and 10 pence, which was worth one life if you were on a Barbadian plantation. More than some. And that's about 2,400 quid in today's money. It's not a great happy topic, but I don't think it's something we can ignore. I think it's an interesting one to put in to show part of what the parish was like. You know, saying that, all those other people around her weren't involved, but she was. And I think it's interesting, why was she there for such a short while? And that is a view from Bystock Terrace in the late 1800s, which could be just a little artwork, which we can do a little history of, or it could be a part of Mrs. Moody's story. But why come to Exeter? I can't find any connections. Why come here? It's a bit of a backwater to come to. This is another one of those early drawings. Oh yeah, this is the only, sorry, I forgot. This is the only view we think we have of the old church at St. David's. This is the first one. And this is a late 19th century copy of an early 18th century drawing, which was somewhere in Exeter. So that would be a nice little story. And of course, what we're doing is we're looking up. This right here. It's somewhere down below, looking straight up. And we can find ourselves in it to a point. There are the oddities. This is Dr. Guest of St. David's Hill near the Iron Bridge, Exeter. And he can cure consumption, and he can cure lots of things with his wonderful botanical drink. I don't think anybody's written him up before, but he's worth a couple hundred words on. Partly because we've got this wonderful drawing of his building, which must be one of the ones right down here before it was rebuilt. So, you know, it's just one of those little intriguing snippets, but it's fun. And then we've got some more serious ones. This is, and I think it's well worth doing, this is Florence Ann Park, who lived along here, right across from the clock tower, going down on New North Road. It's on the left, yeah? And Florence Annie Parks, she ran a nursing home for mothers who were nursing their children, their babies. And she had a young girl come up from Torquay, and just at the start of the Second World War, and the baby died. There was a court case, and Mrs. Parks lost her license, and she had 6 months in prison. The mother of the baby was given 9 months. She was 18 years old. Now, Mrs. Parks lost her business, she lost her home, she lost her husband. She was desperately poor. She had no money for an appeal, but she walked to London to go to court and failed. She spent over a year sleeping on the church bench at St. Martin's in the Fields at night while she sat in the House of Lords trying to get 2 members of the House of Lords to sign a petition to have her case looked at. And she failed. She comes back to Devon. She's sleeping on her friend's sofas by this time, and she happens to go to a women's meeting in Torquay and meets the wife of the Home Secretary. And she says, could your husband look at my case? And Lady, I think it's Lady White, I can't remember, 1917, looks at it, brings it to her husband, and she gets a full pardon along with compensation. The police didn't share the confession from the mother that Annie Parks had nothing to do with the death. The mother had deliberately killed the baby because her own mother had said, you cannot bring the baby home. It's illegitimate. So she had spent 18 years trying to clear her name. She was hounded in the streets by mobs as a baby killer. And then, when she was redeemed, she was a plucky English woman who stood up for herself. Our hero. From one to the other. Well, it's a nice little story to connect to that building about how we can pillory and lionize people based on feelings and not evidence. And the poor woman was saying the whole time, I didn't do anything. I didn't know that when I gave her all her food, she was pouring it down the toilet so the baby didn't eat. She had called the doctor in, and he hadn't done anything. So it's one of those stories which helps in telling a little bit more and making the streets more personal so that we understand the lives of the people who have lived in the same streets we walk along. And we do this. We go to Veitch's nursery, which came to Exeter, which came to this part of the parish, the city, in the 1860s. I think this is one of the trees that's left over from the nursery, but all that on the side of the prison going up behind Bury Meadow, that was part of Veitch's nursery. There are still trees left over from his scheme. We have, and people remember Veitch's shop in the high street, and then it moved into Cathedral Yard. That's the well house, as we kind of remember it. But the Veitch's nursery, we've got wonderful descriptions. And this one man came in 1869 and he said, it has risen as if by magic in these last few years, or rather months, in which is open to all respectable comers. What keen insight into nature's secrets in an enterprising spirit can do are abundantly manifested at Mr. Veitch's nursery in Queen Street. It's pretty, the approach is pretty and imposing. Through an avenue of rhododendrons to the conservatory, this is the way the visitor walks. The central house is a compendious crystal palace. As one enters it, an exclamation of surprise and delight will be sure to escape the lips of any man who is penetrated by a sense of the beautiful. The roof is covered with two fine creeping plants that hang out their richly colored blossom in great profusion. The little forest of azaleas which the Crystal Palace in question contains has been the most attractive feature during the last few days. Their blossoms glow with a radiance that streams upon the eyes of the beholder like a flood of glory. I am not learned in the names of flowers, which are of a very crack-jaw character. I wish they would give them simple English names, as well as bastard Latin names if they must have these. I see before me, and he goes on about all these other things, too numerous to mention, including a new white azalea. The Costa Rica coral plant strikes me with wonder and invites the lover of the beautiful to come and admire it. Look yonder, scrutinizing visitor, at the beautiful picture plant. It is a prodigal of pictures, having no less than a dozen on it. And he goes on and on and on and on. And we have visitor after visitor in the 1860s and 1870s talking about a garden nursery which was world famous, on the doorstep, and all but forgotten. And the entrance through it was through these green gates which I think are these ones here. So there are wonderful things to be told, and there are things which we can't get away from talking about, and one of them is Buller's statue. We all remember the days before the death of that unfortunate man that died, when you would see the horse as a unicorn and him as a buffoon with things hanging off of him. And then a few years ago is the first time I saw this. And then we remember in the last few months with Black Lives Matter, it's taken on a prominence that it hasn't had probably since 1905. It raises lots of questions. Who is the history for? How do you write that topic of history? When something is so divisive, when you have people of one thought, people are on another, how do you write history without pandering to one and ignoring the other's viewpoint? Well, we have to stick to the facts as carefully as we can and talk about what it is. It is a glory of empire. It was meant to be in 1905. It was celebrating something which at that time England was very proud of. And one has to remember that is what it's all about. Just as all the Great War memorials are about empire. Most of them say on there for king, country, and empire, or for home and empire. The difficulty is, how do you write something without annoying, making somebody angry, making somebody upset? Well, we've got the liberty with the way we're doing this in order not just to talk about it in about 100 words, but we can talk about something in a bit more fulsome terms and look at it from different perspectives. But this is one of those things which remind us you have to get history right. And who do you write history for? Exeter has changed, not just in its population, but the generational change has been marked, I think, in the last 10 years. People want slightly different topics than they wanted 10 or 20 years ago. And this is going to be a test for us, and how we look at it, how we present it, because this is not going to go away. It's one of those topics which is just going to be here with us until society settles. And who knows when that's going to be. It may be one of those great things that COVID changes. Like the war. Society was different before and after. This may be the way we're doing history, is all coming at the same time. But it's impossible not to do it, and it's impossible not to do it right as we can. So these are the sorts of things I've done, which I've tried to pull out elements, and we're having some of these for the library. Images, the most important things which I thought had never been published before in Exeter, which were in public hands. We had somebody stealing items from the Exeter Central Library about 15 years ago. And you could order an image, they would bring it to your table, the staff would change, and there was no record of who ordered that object. And what somebody was doing was putting it in a briefcase and taking them home. So there are still items which have gone, which we don't even know about because this wasn't publicized because they didn't want to make it worse. I saw some of these things going, so I took photographs of nearly everything I could, and that's what some of these are in. They're an insurance policy. One of them has disappeared. That is where I talk about the blind people in Exeter. People with no sight who were brought to a safe city not knowing the city was just about to be destroyed, making it very unsafe for them to get around. Memories of people in the war. I did that book 15 years ago, and nearly every one of them has died. I hadn't realized how much at the end of their lives I really was on. Within a few years, and one of the people there didn't recognize herself after a year. She had dementia. Very sad. That is a study of how we separate human beings from each other in Exeter. How religion, race, wealth, physical characteristics have made us think that that person isn't like us and we can treat them differently. And a number of them I've talked about. And that was just reprinted, a new edition last week. A very hard and a very difficult topic, but one where what I'm hoping with that book, which first came out in 2007, is by putting in basic facts, we're informing people who have assumptions. And there's a division opening up between people who say there was no slavery and people saying it was all based on slavery. And of course, neither can be properly true. This is a book of documents showing what is factual, not opinion and not assumption. And that's where we have to fall back on as historians, writing from the evidence without being impartial, putting your opinion across as history. Trying very hard not to do that. And then local charity did this book last year, 1743, a wonderful map of Exeter. Turned out to be a unique map of Exeter. Came up at sale at Bairns. They put the estimated price at 20 quid, not knowing it was the only copy of the map which exists. And I looked at it and kept quiet, thinking, I haven't seen that before. Either it's a very good forgery, or that's the only one, and it's the only one. Unfortunately, a dealer realized it as well, so it went for 510 quid instead of 20. But this little charity did the volume, which I don't know if Keith even has on the shelf.
No, you didn't mention.
I didn't mention. But if you do want a copy, I think it's 20 quid. It's meant to be 35, but we're selling it at 20. And it's available at the museum as well. But what we've done with that is put in all the other maps of Exeter from the 1580s up to the early 1900s with it, so you can plot how Exeter changes over 500 years. Right, so what we have is a project which, I don't want to say groundbreaking because it makes it sound different than it's intended. It's meant to talk about aspects of St. David's which inform people who live here about the surrounding streets as well as this building itself. It's going to hopefully be activated by people who want to have a bit of fun doing research. We have a day planned with the Devon Record Office to bring documents here, and I'll be on hand, as will other people, to help guide people through research. Then topics are written up, they're compressed to 300, 400 words generally, and then they make it onto the screen, and then we have other text which is bigger, which can go on the net, and then hopefully it kickstarts other things as well. And the end result will hopefully be get a better appreciation of the place that we live in. And so that what we pass through the streets every day means that little bit more. Exeter is very lucky in it being a city that you can connect with. Bristol is so big, it's hard. Plymouth is so transient, again, it's very difficult. Exeter is a city to walk around in and discover. Having that late medieval farmhouse just below us is extraordinary. To have the buildings across from Marks and Spencer's, which go back to the 1400s, is amazing in a city centre. And one of the great things about Exeter is we've got this connection. The project will hopefully make it even better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Todd. That was fascinating. I need a picture of my house on there. Just over there, Todd. Just take a photo. Any questions or comments or about the things that Todd said or about our big project and community researchers? Amal.
Yes, thank you very much for the most fascinating. I'm absolutely enthralled of what you said. Really fascinating talk. Made history of buildings come live in people, and it was amazing. Anyway, my question is about the volunteers. Have you already thought about them? How can they apply? What's the process?
Well, some of them are here,
Yeah.
and there are forms for people to fill out,
Which are here.
which are there.
Yeah.
Russ is the creative genius behind this. Am I digging him up enough? Do you want to say anything more about volunteers? How we run? Russ and I have done this in Totnes, and let me tell you, there are challenges in Totnes that other places don't have. In Colleton, which is a very different place because it's so well heeled, they seem to spend more time on holiday than they are in Colleton. I've never known such well heeled people. Oh, the last time we were in the Bahamas, and it was only a couple months ago. And we've done it in the St. Stephen's, just about the church, really. But this has an appeal of its own. It's that walkability and seeing the buildings and being able to say, well, now, wait a minute, this is very much like the one around the corner. And then you run around 2 minutes later and you found the same architect of this one as it is of that one there. And nobody's done this before. This is where the fun bit is.
And this is where, when Todd talked about appeal, this is where I turn you to your information file, which is on your tables, for you to take home. And it has details about the history of the centre, other facts that you'll find useful, but also it has an appeal poster in it to tell you how, if after today you want to get involved, you can then contact us at the centre and then your name will be put on. We're aiming to recruit as many people as possible, but about 25 to 30 people would be just lovely. And also, talking to Russ and talking to Todd, the process is now until March 21, but you don't have to think, I've got to be there 7 days a week or 7 evenings or whatever. You do as much or as little as you're interested in on the topic that you want to research. So at the moment, it's sign up, and we have the structure and general training events that we're going to be organising, and the talks, which are also in your folders, the information about that. But do please join, even if you think, I've never done this before, I don't know anything about research. We're not looking for people who are historian specialists. We have them here. We want people who want to find out much more about what it's like to live here. So don't be daunted if you feel you haven't done anything before, or if you think it's all going to be on the internet. It's not. You'll be able to walk around. You don't have to have techie skills or anything. We just want your heart and your interest, really.
Sorry, Russ, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, we're going to run regular workshops to coach you with the topics we're thinking of researching are on the poster over there, and basically we'll just find people's subjects that they want to research and try and fit everything to people's interests, and then have an ability and time they've got to commit to it. So the most important thing is to get your name down and register some interest, and then we'll tailor everything after we've found out how many volunteers we've got.
One of the things which would be nice, I know this sounds silly, one of the topics that I've been following for a while and I've never done a book on it is animal history. The history of pets in Exeter. And we've got masses on dogs and cats and parakeets and all the rest of it. But the clock tower is an extraordinary example of concern in the Victorian period for animals. And it's part of this movement across the country that animals matter too. And it's not a huge topic, but that would be a really nice one for somebody to write up as well. So there's all these little odd things, as well as the meaty things, which I think is terribly exciting.
I do too. Well, I've signed up already, and I know there are people who are in the room now who have signed up. Can I just introduce a couple of people that you might want to speak to about this before you go? One is Karen. Would you mind standing up, Karen? Karen is our activity officer for our big project. So she's the person who will be coordinating all of this. We also have our apprentices. There's Imogen there, who is one of our apprentices that has just started with us, and also Abigail doing the videoing, who's also just started with us. So you can talk to them too. Please stay for a few minutes and have a look at the touch screens and see how they work. We have locked the doors. You can see that we've locked the doors there. So you have a pen inside your folders. Would you please fill in an evaluation form? We're very interested to know how you felt about today, what you liked, how you feel we could improve. So leave your evaluation form with us. But there are also pens here, if you've already shelved your pen, for you to sign up for more interest in being a volunteer researcher. And please do tell your friends. Ah, lovely. Is there anything anybody else would like to say before we finish? Well, I've got one thing. When you're leaving, if you haven't had your box of canapes, which is next door, please take your box. They were very nice.
They are very nice.
Yeah, but Keith, who has come here, who will be showing you the books if you would like to see any of the books. And can they purchase them today, Keith, or put their name down to purchase them?
So concerned about taking one, then they can go online.
Lovely. So you can either take one today or you can go online. So please just do mill around a little bit, and I'll unlock the doors in a little while when you've done your evaluation forms and things. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Dr Todd Gray. Thank you, Todd.